Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm glad to see you all here. My name is Kimberly Reed, and I am the chair of the newly formed, as of this year, Department of English and Modern Languages, and I want to welcome those of you who are coming onto campus for the first time, if that's true of any of you. Some of you have been to our Landiss lectures many, many times, and it's good to see familiar faces. I also want to acknowledge with gratitude Leslie and Shipley Landiss. The Landiss lectures, as you all probably know, is in honor of their father, and I think now in honor of Shipley's mother as well. Dr. Morris Landiss was the chair of the Department of English for many years, and I see some of his former students in the audience tonight, so we remember Dr. Landiss with much gratitude and affection. I am very pleased to welcome tonight's guest, Elizabeth Cox, back to her native state of Tennessee. Excuse me. She was born in Chattanooga. She attended the University of Tennessee and the University of Mississippi, and she received an MFA in writing from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. She has a robust body of work: poetry, essays, short stories, and novels. Her third novel, Night Talk, won the Lillian Smith Award given by the Southern Regional Council. This award chooses books that raise social consciousness and promote harmony between the races. That book was also a finalist for the Impact Dublin Literary Award. In 2011, Ms. Cox was inducted into the Fellowship of Southern Writers, which is a veritable who's who of great authors. Charter members of the fellowship include William Styron, Eudora Welty, and Robert Penn Warren. Currently elected members of the Fellowship of Southern Writers include Ron Rash, Lee Smith, Tony Early, and Natasha Trethewey. And again, those of you who have been visiting the Landiss will notice that those are all Landiss lecturers from the past. So you're joining a very august group in that sense as well. In the same year, in 2011, she was awarded the Robert Penn Warren Award from the Fellowship for her work in fiction. She's taught at several schools, including Bennington College, Duke University, and Wofford College in South Carolina. Her writings reveal an unending, immense curiosity about the natural world, about time and place, parents and children, friends and lovers. As she writes in her poem, At Last, it is the world, the earth, that tells us everything. The wide, dark sky, the hard light of a star, the full, sweet bud of an iris, the holy voice that comes late in life, the nightmares that ride along beside our dreams. How long has this been going on? When we are 60, 70, 80, will we remember the things, anything, we said or did? Or will we think about the day the heart took a different path? Maybe just the act of looking up at something, the sight itself, opening the head, at last, taking off the cap of the world. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Cox.
Thank you, Kim. That was a very generous introduction, and thank you, Carolyn. And I had the privilege of being with students that I see sitting here. You have very smart students, by the way. They ask wonderful questions. Tonight, I'm gonna talk about a little bit about a way of looking, a way of seeing, and I'm going to read a poem, and then I'm going to talk about fiction. I'm going to read a story. I'm going to begin with, Ralph Waldo Emerson had many bits of practical advice for writers, but one of my favorites is, he said, the good writer, and only a good writer, has to keep one eye on the page and the other eye sweeping over things, so that every sentence brings in more observation. When I teach students, I mainly teach them how to observe the world. You know, I've taught creative writing for a long time, 30 years, and people say, can you really teach it? Can you teach creative writing? Well, I don't know. But you can teach students to observe the world in a certain way, to look with a very intense eye, to teach them a way of seeing without blinders on, to look with a compassionate rather than a judgmental eye. There's a book by Annie Dillard called Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and in it she has an essay called Sight into Insight. And she talks about a way of seeing that's more than observance. And in fact, she says, informed observance can block this kind of sight. And in order to see this way, it's necessary to go back to that first kind of sight early in your life when you saw without any knowledge. You experienced the world without any knowledge, and you were just aware of patterns and patches of color. And in this essay, she talked about some blind people. They'd been blind since birth, and they had an operation, and all of a sudden they could see. For the first time, they could see, but they weren't aware of form or depth or distance, and they didn't understand what shadows were. Everything looked flat. One girl looked out on the lawn and said, "What are all those dark marks on everything?" And another girl was walking in the woods. She described a tree with the lights in it. She was amazed with the sight of it, with the beauty of it. If we had seen it, we would have known that the wind was blowing the leaves and the sunlight was shining through and filtering, making it sparkle. Our knowledge would have flattened the experience. We wouldn't have felt the amazement, the sense of awe that she felt. Annie Dillard wanted to see this way, and she walked through the woods trying to see without any knowledge, and she knew that you couldn't seek this kind of sight, but it involved more a letting go. And she knew that it could last only a moment. You've had those moments. They feel slightly off-kilter or odd. You probably say, "Oh, that's just my imagination." Just my imagination. Thoreau calls these momentary ways of being, and he says, don't judge those times as less important just because they're momentary. You can be closed to this kind of sight because it doesn't last or because it doesn't make sense, but what does last is this way of putting yourself into the world, putting yourself into the path that pays attention and lets the experience of the imagination keeps it ready to see and to hear. Then one day Annie Dillard did see it, and this is how she described it. She saw the tree with the lights in it. Then one day I was walking along Tinker Creek thinking of nothing at all, and I saw the tree with the lights in it. I saw the backyard cedar where the mourning doves roost, charged and transfigured, each cell buzzing with flame. I stood on the grass with the lights in it, grass that was holy fire, utterly focused and utterly dreamed. It was less like seeing than like being for the first time seen, knocked breathless by a powerful glance. The flood of fire abated, but I'm still spending the power. Gradually, the lights went out in the cedar, the colors died, the cells unflamed and disappeared. But I was still ringing. I had been my whole life a bell and never knew it until at that moment I was lifted and struck. Lifted and struck. That's a way to see the world, and that's a way to write about it, too. I try to teach students to see the tree with the lights in it. Some of them do. Some of them write me years later, a lawyer in Miami. You've seen the tree with the lights in it. So I wrote a poem. I tell students to pay attention to everything. And this book of poems, I have told you and told you, the title poem is for my students. I tell them, I say, does it matter to you how light comes into the room at different times of the day? Does it matter a lot? Does it matter to you how shadows are at different seasons? Does the moon wake you up at night and you go out? I'll tell you this, I do. The moon does wake me up at night. And I go out, and I'd been married to my husband about 6 months. And I went out, saw the moon, came back in. The next morning he said, "Why do we have leaves in our bed?" I just apologized to him. But this is, I've told you to my students. I've told you and told you not to throw sticks. When you pick up a stick, look instead to see if it has life, any shade of green, or see if it is brittle, breaking apart. Either way is right. I've told you so many times how to peel a peach, skimming the thin edge of fuzz to find the pulp and juice below. I've told you to bury the large hard seed, and a whole tree might grow. I've said you must dip your feet into every river you pass, so that water licks your legs and for a moment breaks the flow before all goes back to what it was. I've told you and told you to rise up in the middle of the night, to see the moon, to find where it is, to sit on the ground in the moonlight until leaves stick to your gown, and the next morning wake to find leaves on your bed sheets. I've instructed you about ways to sing, to animals and rocks, to children in the yard, to a hummingbird, or to yourself when you remember someone who is gone. I've told you to see the world, to be awake and amazed at the way light falls into a room or the way shadows change with each season, to walk on mountainsides anticipating a glimpse of those tiny blue flowers hiding beneath thick stems. I've told you to seek the heart of someone's face, to look behind what is said and hear the language of all that cannot be spoken. I've told you, too, about trees and how to dive inside those rings, wrapping them around your arms until you don't remember who you are. If you can do these things, you will never be bored. You will be wide, wide awake. Now, about fiction. Think about why you read fiction, or think about why people refuse to read fiction. They say it's a waste of time because it isn't true. You know, you've heard that? Some of you, nobody in this room, I don't imagine. Not with Carolyn in here. Sometimes you ask a writer, is that true? Borges was giving a reading in New York City one time, and somebody raised their hand. I can't believe they did it with Borges. But they said, was that true? And he said, yes, but it didn't really happen that way. You know what I mean? That's the right answer. Being true has nothing to do with facts. It isn't what happened to you. It has to be true to the character and the situation. I had a teacher, Fred Chappell, and I wrote a story for him, and he read it, and he said, Betsy, this doesn't seem true to me. And I thought, boy, I have him now. I said, yeah, Fred, but that really happened. And he said, so what? And it was at that moment I realized that it's not what happened to me, it's what happens to all of us. It has to be about us, about what is human, not what happened particularly to me. So I think of fiction as a way of telling the truth that's more powerful than other ways of telling the truth. Story offers us a peripheral vision that's different from the regular way of looking at the world. Story tells us something by telling us to look somewhere else. I'm going to tell you a story about rage. I may not mention rage. I won't define rage. I say, see that man in the jail cell? He's been there for 18 years for something he didn't do. I tell you his story, you'll know about rage. And though the method is indirect, the path is the path that reaches the heart in the way direct observation in the form of science or the analysis of abstract ideas in the form of philosophy cannot do. When I lived in Durham, North Carolina, I liked to go to the planetarium at Chapel Hill and see whatever phenomena was currently happening in the sky. And one night I went over to see a comet, and you could see it with the naked eye. You didn't need a telescope, but you could barely see it, just a faint light going across the sky. I was having trouble finding it, but I was trying to look where everyone was pointing. And until somebody behind me said, if you look straight at it, you won't see it. You have to turn your head slightly and see it in your peripheral vision. And when I did that, I could see the comet moving across the sky. Stories are like that. They present some of the truths about human nature, but they do it by showing you a character as he moves through his life, through his place, reacting to other characters, and we see the changes and the movement and feel a connection. Now, of course, you know what I did. Immediately, when I saw it in my peripheral vision, my impulse was to turn and look at it directly. You'll do that when you're writing. Sometimes you'll think, oh yeah, I need to explain this, And I lost it when I did that. And it took several times making that mistake to learn the lesson of that kind of vision, learning to trust it, believe it was true as my direct sight. And in this case, it was the only way to see it. Very often, concepts such as love and hope and hate and fear and rage are best seen in this peripheral vision. And if you try to describe it directly, you'll lose it, because the knowledge of the imagination is different and more subtle than the knowledge of the intellect. The imagination requires the presentation of an experience to create understanding, not an explanation to create understanding. But the hard part is to create an experience on the page. I hope I can live up to that. I'm going to read a story. It's called Saved. When Josie Wire walked down to the front of the tent at a revival meeting, her friend Alice was with her. The words of the preacher had stirred their hearts, and for weeks afterward they spoke of nothing but being missionaries in Africa. Alice would be a medical missionary, Josie a regular one. Both girls were 12, though Josie would turn 13 in June. My dad thinks we'll change our minds later on, Alice told Josie. He says just wait till we get interested in boys. But Alice was already interested in boys, and Josie dreamed of them at night. I can't imagine changing our minds, can you? Said Josie. I mean, I've seen pictures of Africa. I wanted to go there even before I knew about God. I'm just saying what he told me, said Alice. Alice's father was a neurologist who lived in a big house where Josie loved to spend the night. On Saturday mornings, Alice and Josie sat at a table in the dining room with sun pouring through the long windows. A Spanish woman named Rosa served them eggs and bacon and hot cinnamon rolls. She said, por favor, if she didn't understand something. Josie liked to try to talk to the Spanish woman. She liked to imitate her accent and flounce around the kitchen copying Rosa. Rosa wore skirts that made her look like a flamenco dancer. She told Josie that she had grown up in Barcelona. Once Josie had walked into the kitchen and seen Alice's father standing there next to Rosa with his hand on her shoulder. Rosa was barefoot, her head down. She looked beautiful. Alice told Josie that Rosa kept some magic beads in a box by the sink. And whenever Rosa prays, said Alice, she rolls those beads around in her hands. After that, Josie stole one of her mother's worst necklaces, and when she prayed, she held the necklace, rubbing each bead hard. Josie's family did not have servants, had never had them. Her own father taught history at a private school, and her mother, until recently, had worked as a clerk in a downtown store. Mrs. Wire had stopped working a few months before, and money was tight now. Alice lived in a posh neighborhood, though it was situated not far from a housing project. The girls enjoyed walking into the poor section to give dollar bills to children or beggars. Their parents did not know they were doing this. Each Saturday, since they had dedicated their lives, the girls gave away their weekly allowance to poor people. "We've got to stop giving all our money away," said Alice. "We don't even have enough to go to the movies anymore." "But I don't mind staying home if it's for a good cause," said Josie. She felt that her dedication was stronger than Alice's and wanted Alice to feel the way she did. "There's so many people who need us." "Like who?" "Like that lady we gave money to today and others who hang out in bars, people like that." "We can't do anything for those people," said Alice. "Maybe we can." Josie began to thumb through the phone book looking for the number of a bar called the Wagon Wheel. Each time she thought of its name, her blood grew excited. The bar was located not far from where Josie lived, so she passed it going to school or to town. She grew silent, trying to look inside, trying to see what was going on. On this Saturday night, she suggested to Alice that they find the number and make a call to someone at that bar. "What would we say?" asked Alice, putting her own finger on the words in the phone book. For the first time, she looked excited about Josie's idea. "We could just talk. Whoever answers, we'll just ask them about their life. It'll be good." Since the idea was Josie's, she had to make the call. A man with a gruff voice answered. "Yeah, who is it?" The man was used to getting calls from wives checking up on her husband. Josie couldn't speak. "Hello," said the voice. Excuse me," Josie finally said. "To who am I speaking?" She tried to make her voice sound gravelly and older. "Who the hell is this?" the man said. Josie tried to hand the phone to Alice, but Alice wouldn't take it. "My name is Josie," she was almost shouting, "and I'm calling to see if you're a saved person or not." "Is this a joke?" the man asked. "You have to answer if you are saved." There, she said it. Josie could hear the tinkle of glasses and wild music in the background. "No," he said, "I'm not." He expected a punchline. "Do you want to be?" she asked. "What does it mean?" the man asked prudently. "It means everything," said Josie and smiled at Alice. It was working. She and Alice grew excited at the idea of their first prospect. "You won't have to worry about anything, like if you're going to heaven, stuff like that." "I'm not ready to die anyway," the man said. "I mean, when it's time, then you'll go to be with the angels instead of to, you know." "What do I have to do?" The man sounded mollified. "You have to love Jesus," said Josie. "Okay," the man said quickly. "Really?" "Yeah." The man hung up. Josie dialed the number again. "Yeah," said the voice. "Listen," said Josie, "that was mean. I just wanted to ask you about something and you hung up on me." "We must have been cut off," said the man. "How old are you?" "I'm 15, Josie lied, excited that the man who was not saved and probably drunk was asking her about herself. She did look 15. She had breasts and a deep curve at the waist. Her hips moved out like little hills. She and Alice had both developed figures that were catching the eyes of boys and men. Alice had even begun to go to the drugstore with Boog Barnett, who was the handsomest boy in the 8th grade. Boog said words like piss and damn. Sometimes Alice repeated the words. She let him put his arm around her waist and buy her Coke floats. Since their interest in Boog had accelerated around the same time as their being saved, they had talked almost as much about Boog as they had about being missionaries. "I bet you're pretty," said the man. "I bet you look like some of the students I used to have in my classroom. What's your name?" Josie told him her name and said she had a friend named Alice. She and Alice shivered with the thrill of talking to a strange man on the phone at 10 o'clock at night. They had not expected anyone to be friendly. "What's yours?" she asked. "Samuel Beckett," said the man. "That's nice. That's a nice name," said Josie, mouthing the name to Alice. "I think I've heard of you." "I don't see how." "What do you do?" Josie asked. "I used to be a teacher, but got fired." Josie grew silent. "I probably taught little girls like you. You don't sound so little, though." He spoke his words as though he were proffering a gift. "What do I sound like?" she asked. "Like a young woman," he said. "I'm wondering what you look like, though. What kind of hair do you have?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, is it long or short, and what color is it? I'm just trying to picture what you look like." "It's brown," said Josie. "It's kind of curly." "Well," said the man. He was waiting to hear more. "I thought we were talking about whether or not you were saved," said Josie. "I said I wasn't." "But don't you want to be?" "Depends." "Depends on what?" "On who's saying it," he said. "I have to hear something like that from somebody I can trust. I have to be sure the person's telling me the truth. Are you telling me the truth?" "Oh, yes," said Josie. "My friend Alice will tell you too. She'll tell you the same thing. We work together." "I don't care about any Alice," said Samuel Beckett. "I want to hear about you." Josie tried not to look as pleased as she felt. Over the last couple of weeks, Alice had spent more and more time with boys, and Josie had been left alone in her quest to be faithful. She thought Alice was being drawn away from God, and Alice kept saying that you could like a boy and still like God. Josie didn't see how. "I bet he's old," said Alice when they hung up. "I bet he's old and decrepit." "He didn't sound it," said Josie. "He sounded real nice." "How nice can he be, him being in a bar?" Alice folded back the bed and fluffed the pillows. Each of them had 2 large pillows on their bed. At Josie's home, each person only had 1 pillow. It occurred to Josie that the reason Boog Barnett was asking Alice out was because Alice was rich. Alice said it was time for bed and they should say their prayers now. "Do you think God likes jokes?" Josie asked. "I don't know," said Alice. "Why?" "Well, sometimes when I pray, I tell him a joke. I think he likes for me to. I bet not many people do that." Alice said she was tired, but they talked for a while about what their life in the Congo would be like, until there came a long silence when Josie asked Alice a question about native rituals. Alice didn't answer. "You asleep?" Josie asked, and the lack of an answer made her feel alone. Josie prayed silently for the man in the bar. Then she prayed to be sexy like the woman from Barcelona. She also prayed for her mother, who seemed to be crying all the time now. Over the last year, whenever Josie came home, she would find her mother in the kitchen with her head on her arms, crying. So one night, Josie asked her brother if their parents were going to get a divorce. The next day, Mr. Wire reassured Josie that she need not worry about divorce. "Did James tell you I asked about that?" said Josie. "Yes," said Mr. Wire, "and I wanted you to know that your mother's sadness is about you. She worries about you and the operation that's coming up." A few years ago, Josie had been diagnosed with aortic stenosis and would need an operation for her heart. The operation was scheduled for August. The doctor had explained how the procedure would be performed, but he had waited for Josie to be older, stronger. Josie thought about what the doctor told her, but she hadn't worried until she saw her mother's sadness. Every night, she prayed that her mother would stop crying. On the next Friday night, Josie and Alice called the wagon wheel again to see if the man would answer. He didn't, and the harsh voice who spoke to Josie hung up on her. She called back, remembering the persistence of the disciples, and asked for Samuel Beckett. She tried to make her voice sound older by lowering it. She heard the gruff-voiced man call out the name, "Sam Beckett," and a long pause. When he returned to the phone, he said, "Nobody here by that name." Then, "Wait a minute, here he is." "Hello? Samuel Beckett?" "Yeah, it's Josie." "Well, I recognize your voice, pretty Josie." His voice slurred against itself, "Pretty baby." He sort of sang her name. "I sure think you ought to let me see ya." "Why?" said Josie. She didn't want Alice to know what he had said, but she had blushed, and Alice was saying, "What? What did he say?" "He wants to meet me," Josie mouthed. Alice sucked in her breath. "I think if I meet you, I'm more likely to see whether I want to be saved. You could tell me what it's like, maybe I'll be convinced." He did not sound like someone who had ever been a teacher. "Well," said Josie, "I wouldn't be able to come there. I'd get in trouble if I did." "We could meet at the park," he said. "Would you meet with me in the park? You know how the benches have numbers on them?" "Yes." "You could come to bench 23. "I would bring Alice with me," Josie said, but Alice was shaking her head no. "I mean, if I come, I would bring Alice." "Sure," he slurred. "Alice is a pretty baby, too." He hung up, and Alice and Josie argued about whether or not to go to bench 23 during the coming week. "He didn't say when we should go. Does he just think we're going to go and wait every day?" Alice said. "I don't know." Alice and Josie went to bench 23 on Monday afternoon, but no one was there. Alice was relieved. They waited almost 20 minutes. "We probably ought to get home," Alice said. "My mom will be worried." They called the wagon wheel again the next weekend, but this time on Sunday night, and Samuel Beckett answered the phone. His voice was clear, not slurry. "Hello," Samuel Beckett said. "I waited for you at the bench," said Josie. "I waited on Monday and you didn't come." "I'm sorry about that," said Beckett. "I'm afraid I was drunk. But I'll meet you this Tuesday afternoon," he said. "That's my day off." "Did you know I got a part-time job as bartender? I think you're bringing me good luck." "I am? I might turn into a believer yet." She could tell by his voice that he was smiling, happy. "Really?" "I'm busy now and have to go, but you meet me on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. I don't get out of school till 3:30. 4 o'clock then." "Is it still bench 23? Josie asked. "Yeah," Sam said. "I'm not going with you this time," said Alice. "I have cheerleading practice." Another thing that was coming between Alice and Josie was the fact that Alice had been selected as next year's cheerleader. She was cheerleader, plus she had Boog Barnett. Josie had only one boy interested in her, a guy who was good in math class. Fred Jacks had body odor and his hair was long and unruly. Every time she looked at him, she wondered if someday in the future he might look good. She had seen pictures of Cary Grant when he was young and thought how unappealing he was. She wondered if Fred Jacks could turn out better than she imagined. On Tuesday morning, Josie wore a red sweater and a navy blue skirt to school. "You're getting so dressed up today," her mother said. Her mother's crying had lessened and she was becoming even cheerful, but sometimes the cheerfulness felt forced. "What's the occasion?" "Just felt like it," said Josie. Her mother smiled. "That Freddie Jacks is just as smart as he can be," said her mother. The first half of the day dragged, but after lunch, English class and social studies went by quickly. By 3:30, Josie was leaving the school, walking toward the park. Alice was not with her. She saw Samuel Beckett sitting on bench 23. He was tall. Even sitting down, he looked tall. He was thin and wore old pants and a clean shirt. His hair was combed, and Jessie guessed his age to be about 40, though she couldn't tell for sure. She hoped she looked older than her 13 years and imagined she would have to admit that she had lied about her age. "Well, you certainly look older than 15, Mr. Beckett said upon seeing her. "If you were Josie, I would have said you were 16 or 17 at least." "Thank you." Josie sat on the bench where he had scooted over to create a space for her. "I brought my Bible and some religious tracts." She handed him the tracts, but her hands were shaking. "You can keep those." He slipped the papers into his shirt pocket and thanked her, but kept his eyes focused on Josie's purse, which hung from her shoulder. His eyes were bright blue and his face thin. He did not have a beard as she had imagined, but was clean-shaven. Josie had expected him to look scruffier. He was actually handsome. He had a low, calm voice. He sounded like a teacher now. His words were not slurred, though the whites of his eyes looked bloodshot and watery, as if he had been crying for a long time. "So what do you want to tell me?" He was going to let her begin. He was going to listen to whatever she had to say. "I don't know what to say," Josie began. Then she thought, "When I got saved in April, I had to walk up to the front of the tent at a Billy Graham meeting. I walked all the way." "Did that scare you?" he asked. "A little bit," she said, "but afterwards I felt so different. Happy, you know. I want to make everybody else feel the same way." "I'm not sure you can do that," Mr. Beckett said. He laughed and touched her arm, the arm that held her purse, and Josie jumped. She pulled away from him. He took a strand of her hair and pushed it behind her ear. Josie's heart leapt at his touch. What awakened in her made her body collapse inside, and she grew sweaty. Her breasts felt at attention. "Now what do I have to do?" he asked. "There's no tent, no long walk." "Well," said Josie, "you have to want it yourself. If you don't want it, it won't work." Her voice was unsteady and her hands shaky. She felt she was doing the Lord's work and that this was how hard it was going to be. She thought about what it would feel like if this man kissed her. She pursed her lips as she had seen women do in the movies. She felt older, sexy. She felt wild and held tightly to her Bible. "Maybe you don't want to be saved," she offered. "Some people just aren't interested. I have a brother named James, and he doesn't care a thing about it." Josie put the Bible on Sam Beckett's legs, and he looked down at it as though she had dropped a stone in his lap. "Why not?" he asked her. "James likes being bad. He thinks if he's saved, he can't be bad anymore." "That's probably not true," Mr. Beckett said. "I don't know," she said. "I don't think you can want to be bad." "Sometimes you can't help it, though," he said. "I mean the wanting." His words were so exciting that Josie felt trembly. His eyes grew bright looking at her, and she thought she saw his mood change. He gave her back the Bible. "Come with me," he said, and offered his hand to lead her away. Josie followed him into a section of the park that led to a stream. She tried to walk the way she imagined Rosa would walk. She tried to pretend that she was Rosa. When they were in the trees, Sam looked around. Then he put his hands on Josie's shoulders and turned her toward him. He leaned to kiss her forehead. For the first time, Josie could smell him. He did not smell like her brother or her father. He smelled the way she imagined Africa would smell. He had the odor of fur and ground. She loved his smell. Josie did not try to squirm away, but stood very still and let Mr. Beckett run his hand down the small of her back over her bottom. She let him touch her breasts and thought that this might be the only man who would ever touch her. If she had her operation and if something went wrong, then this might be her only chance for love. She let him roam around her body at will. Then he moved her toward the ground until he was almost on top of her. He looked at her for a long moment, and Josie couldn't tell what he was thinking. He looked sad. Sam Beckett was kissing Josie's forehead and cheeks, but he had not yet kissed her mouth. Josie had never been kissed on the mouth except when she was 7 and that boy had moved away. She didn't count that as a kiss and wanted her mouth to be kissed now. She thought if she could be kissed, that maybe her operation might be put off again until after Thanksgiving, after Christmas. But when she turned her mouth toward him, Mr. Beckett stopped abruptly. He moved to get up. "You are very young," he said. "Por favor," said Josie. She wondered if he had realized that she was not yet 15. "You know, Josie," Beckett spoke, confused, but taking charge of himself, "you shouldn't be so willing to trust people." "I don't trust people," she said. Anyway, he brushed some dirt off his arms. I'm thinking that maybe you brought me good luck. Why? Because I got a job after I talked with you. I thought you said you were a teacher, Josie questioned. I was, but I lost that job, and when I was out of work, I just drank more than ever. I lost everything. Josie kept wondering if he might take her money. She had $10 in her purse, and she thought he might take it all. Are you poor? She asked. Mr. Beckett said nothing. Maybe you could get back your job, said Josie. I bet you were good. She was trying to think of a way to bring back the fervor of his previous attention, but he already seemed through with her. She didn't know what had gone wrong. I really was a good teacher, he said. She could see him tear up. Mr. Beckett, she said, and opened her hand to him like offering a small bird. His hands were large and warm. He didn't seem old at all, and for once in her life, Josie felt richer than Alice. I have a secret, she told him. Josie decided to tell him something she had not even told Alice, though Alice would have to know sooner or later. You want to know what it is? I guess so. Sam Beckett was smiling, but his smile seemed impatient now. He wanted to leave. I don't have long, he said. Josie could not believe she would tell this man what she was about to say. She licked her lips. 4 years ago, the doctors found a hole in my heart, and on August 10th, they're going to operate. So when I have the operation, they don't know if I'll come through it or not. So that's partly why I decided to be saved, because if I'm saved, then maybe God will let me live, you know? And then I can go to Africa, which is my main dream. Do you know there are animals there that people don't even know what they are? She paused to take a breath. And if I do not come through, then I figure since I'm already saved, I'll go to heaven and look down on everybody, watch what people do. Maybe I can watch you, what you do. Maybe you will look through a window one day and see me there. Her story jangled this man, visibly made him jump, and he looked at Josie Wire for a long time without speaking. He looked at her as if he were not seeing anything, but instead was seeing someone he used to know. How did they know about the hole in your heart, he asked. I would get so tired and blue in the face, Josie said. My face turned blue and my lips. She looked at Mr. Beckett. She wanted him to kiss her again. She wanted him to kiss her on the lips. I have a secret too, Sam said. He would give this girl the truth. My name is not Beckett. It's Honeycutt, Bob Honeycutt. I was just teasing you when I said Beckett. He covered her hand with his. Josie didn't think that was much of a secret and said so. That's more like a lie, she said. He lifted the Bible from the ground and held it. I think I might like to look at this book, he told her. I might like to read it myself. You would? Josie could hardly help from asking. Does this mean you might hope to be saved? I think it does, he said slowly and held out his hand. Josie shook it, pumping Bob Honeycutt's arm hard. I can't believe it, she said. Wait till I tell Alice. Josie began again. Listen, my daddy's a teacher. He teaches at Webb School. Maybe you could get a job teaching there. Well, said Beckett Honeycutt, I think I better take care of that matter myself. He stood, and the length of him amazed Josie. You got to have faith, said Josie, and she stood up facing him. I have faith. I'm going to Africa someday and see everything. Have you ever been over there? No, he said. Listen, said Josie, would you kiss me? Before you leave? Bob Honeycutt leaned over and meant to kiss Josie's forehead, but Josie at that moment turned her mouth to his mouth, and her first thought after he kissed her was that kissing was overrated, that it didn't feel like anything. He walked away. As she went toward the edge of the park, Josie couldn't decide whether or not to give him all her money, but as she opened her purse, he was gone. She did decide, though, to keep the secret about her defective heart a while longer. Alice did not need to know yet. If Alice knew the truth, they could not plan to go to Africa. Josie Wire loved dreaming about Africa. She kept that dream inside her. She would love the smell of it there. She already knew what it would be like. Thank you. Someone had asked me if I wanted to answer some questions, and I'm happy to. Who do you think got saved in that story?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Today at lunch, when you were talking to some of us who were there, you said that you create characters and live with them for a while when you're thinking about what's going to be happening, and then when you write, you
Mm-hmm.
let the plot flow from your knowledge of characters.
I do. I write them. I go with them places. A good way to learn your character is to put your character with their father or their mother and see what they argue about, or some family member and get them in an argument. You find out a lot about a character when you do that. Anyway, trouble. There's no story unless there's trouble. There's got to be trouble. But yeah, I hang out with them and go places with them. And I don't keep all of that material, but it's like getting to know somebody. You hang out with them a while.
Do you do the same thing when you're thinking about a short story as you do when you're thinking about a novel?
Yeah, I always have to hang out with the characters. Right. Though with this story, I was telling my husband, oh, this is embarrassing. When I was 12 and walked up at a Billy Graham meeting, I called bars Friday nights with my friend. We were both going to be missionaries in Africa. And we called the bar, and I told him that I asked if they were saved. But in the real life, they always said yes. So I had no work to do. Everybody in that bar was saved. So every time I called. So I had to create a problem. And also, this little girl was right at the edge of sexuality, and passion is passion. And she gets this sexuality mixed up with the love for God, you know. Yes. Matt. Or who? Okay. Leslie.
To me, that was a really uncomfortable
Should have been. I should have been. I look up and I see people laughing, then I watch you get very uncomfortable. You know, I think that's the job of a writer, to move you into an uncomfortable place. And to create a problem. You were rooting for her, weren't you? You know, I thought this man was going to hurt her. And I was surprised when he pulled back. I thought, oh no, when I was writing it. And then I realized, when she opened up and was going to let him kiss her, that vulnerability, he could not, it saved him. Her vulnerability saved him. Her kind of willingness and not knowing, her ignorance and her willingness and her wish to be kissed, because she knew she was going to die. I think she dies. I think she's right in that she dies. In my mind, she does. Yeah, Matt.
I was going to ask a question about the poetry side of your imagination. You've talked a lot about imagining your characters, hanging out with your characters, having the characters before you have the plot, and then you see what happens. When you're in that other mood, when you're writing poetry, do you feel that that's a fundamentally different
Yeah.
kind of imagination?
Yeah, Matt.
So how does the start of a poem feel to you?
It's hard to image. I guess it's mainly the power of an image. I was reading that book you all were reading by Jane Hirschfield about 9 gates, and in it she has a word called origo. I love words with O's in them anyway. That was beginning and the end. And origo is the place where water comes up out of the ground naturally. And my image for that poem is of a little boy digging in the ground and digging for water. And then the next stanza is the water that's coming up through the ground. Origo is also origin of originality. Coming up naturally. And then the next one is about imagination. And the last one, but that was one image where I had two things coming together. It's usually about an image or a phrase that fascinates me and I don't know what it means and I have to discover what it means. You know, I read a lot of Carl Jung, and he talks about the power of image. And he says, for instance, somebody says this: I had a dream last night of a tiger and a gorilla. But yesterday I went to the circus. So the tiger and gorilla that I saw there, I had that dream because of that. But Jung says, maybe the animals in your own psyche were activated by what you saw at the circus. Maybe the tiger and the gorilla inside your unconscious was activated so that it's not a cause and effect thing. It's not you saw this and so then you dreamed, but rather a connection. And if you can delve into that connection, you can learn something you've never seen before. And he says that there are connections between disparate ideas. Many times scientists come from one idea from a completely different one, and the answer comes in that. Like a dialectic, you know, it comes out of these two. Or harmonies. You ever listen to music and get an image? It's a connection, which is much stronger than explaining it away logically through cause and effect. And that's what I try to go for. I try to submerge myself into that place of image and out of the world of logic. I've never trusted logic anyway. It never makes sense to me. Only this other stuff makes sense to me. It's a good thing I'm not a scientist measuring. Good thing I'm not a surgeon. Yes.
I'm so curious about how you create characters and spend time with them. Does that usually happen with multiple characters at the same time?
It can.
As they go together, or do you have a character that stays with you for a while and then you find another that goes with them later, and that's when the story finishes?
That's an interesting question because sometimes I'll be with one character and I'll find out that they're married. So I know they kind of introduce me to other characters or friends, or I always learn more through conflict. I pull them into conflict because I don't see the true person until I see how they behave in conflict. So if I'm having trouble with a character, they have an argument with somebody. Yeah.
I was really interested in your story about how you portrayed the two girls and their relationship, because I felt that felt really true to me, being that age and that relationship. When you friends that have been your friends in childhood start changing.
Yes, Right.
And I was wondering, like, how did that dynamic come about between Alice and Josie in your mind? You were thinking, I mean, did Josie kind of come first and then Alice's counterpoint to her?
Josie came first, but she needed someone to talk to. She needed a friend. They came kind of full blown. It's a gift when that happens. I didn't have to work hard. They just said those things, and I just wrote down what they were saying. You know, the boyfriend, and the one had a boyfriend, and one had an ugly boyfriend that smelled bad. But their fervor was similar. One had a little more, but she had more going on in her life that she was keeping secret. Secrets, to find out a character's secret is a good way. See what their secrets are, and that tells you a lot about them. Even if they don't tell it, the reader probably needs to know. Yes?
Did you find it hard to go back to that age and find that dialogue that is more authentic to the way 12 and 13-year-olds speak, especially at a certain point where age kind of makes memory a little more foggy?
Mm-hmm.
Was that hard to do, or did you watch other interactions with younger people?
Sometimes that is hard to do. It wasn't in this story. Those girls they came full blown for some reason. Sometimes a character does. Every time I write about a 7-year-old boy, it's full blown. It's easy. I put 7-year-old boys in every novel because I think that's what I am. I'm dressed like a woman, but I am a 7-year-old boy. And that is just the easiest thing for me. But those were full-blown. Sometimes the hardest dialogue to get is a woman my own age. I don't know why, but sometimes that's the hardest.
In terms of subject, authenticity?
And authenticity. Maybe I'm protecting. You know, when you get close to yourself, you begin to protect and you don't expose as much. And I can expose better either older or younger, their own age, or if something's happening to me that's similar to what's happening in the story. It's hard to tell the whole truth. I'll get there, but I have to cut away a lot. It's about exposing the human nature, good and bad, exposing the faults without judgment, I think. Even the worst character in here, I didn't judge. I did feel compassion for this man who had probably molested before, a damaged person.
With your characters, are they the ones, do you ever go into the story knowing what you want to write about? Or do your characters, you just get a character and then just start writing about them and then all of a sudden you are in the middle of the story and then have to go back and write the beginning? Or
Oh, all the time. Yeah. I start wherever I start. I always assume it's the beginning, but I'm mostly wrong. The beginning I write once I discover what the story is about. I don't plan out the story, or if I do, it doesn't go that way. If it's interesting, it doesn't go that way. I don't think I'm that smart to plan out not smart enough to plan out a story. I'd rather discover it. That's the fun of it, discovering what it's about. It's always better than what I thought up. But yeah, I do have to go back. Sometimes, especially in a novel, the beginning is the last thing I write because I have to change it so much. And I think because it's gone all the way to the end, and I think, where is the beginning of this story? The beginning where I started, I was fine, but is it the beginning of the novel? You know. Does it distress you to have to go back and think, do you think you've done something wrong?
No, I think it's actually more comforting.
Yeah, oh, good, good.
You don't know where you want to start, but you have a character in that.
You just start somewhere. Maybe it's the middle. Maybe it's the end. Who knows?
Would you just give us one little hint about the book you just finished?
The book I just finished is called A Question of Mercy. It's a hard one. It's about a girl who has a stepbrother she's lost her mother. Her father remarried, and the stepbrother it's in the 50s, and the stepbrother has an IQ of about 50. So he will never be above 7 years old. But he's about 18, and she's about 16. And she hates him at first. And then she grows to love him. And I taught special education for 6 years, more than 6 years, early in my life. I loved it. I loved it because, I don't know, maybe it takes intellect to have meanness. They would be bad, but there was no meanness in them. They didn't have enough intellect to be mean. And I loved hanging around with them. And so I based this boy on a combination of people I knew then. The sweetness of him and the way he misunderstood and his ability to love. So I'm going to make you love him. Then, the girl, he's going to have to be sent, because there were no other choices back in the 50s, to an institution that does lobotomies, castrations, and induced comas. And you are going to hate the thought of this young man going there. And the girl who has grown to love him, he gets in trouble because his sexuality is the same as any 18-year-old, but he can't ever express it. And so he gets in trouble. He doesn't ever do anything wrong, but he gets in trouble just for things, his curiosity, and he's reported, and he's going to be sent to jail or this institution. Those are the choices. And this girl is going to let him drown in the river. And she might be put in jail. So it's a horrible choice she makes. She's young. She's going to be tried for it, and she's going to be running away. But there is a moral/immoral choice to be made here. And what I wanted to do was to create, the discomfort. I wanted to create the discomfort in the reader. Think, if I make you love him enough, you might think, I might have done that. I want to make you that uncomfortable. But the people who've read it so far have been so uncomfortable that they won't buy it. But you also have sections that I go into that are just his mind. And that's the part where I can use poetry. And because of the way he understands things that are skewed. And he is so lovely. He is such a lovely person. So, and I wonder how often we kill off those lovely people. I tend to write about a violent world, but I write about a gentle soul in a violent world and how they stay gentle. But I do write about violent worlds. I can't help but do that. That's what I see. I don't want to be blind to it. But then, how do you navigate gentleness within that? I think every book I've written is probably about that. I don't mean to write about that, but it just, when I look back, I think, oh my gosh, another book about this? Maybe I can't write about anything else. We'll see. Thank you so much for coming and listening the way you've listened and treating me in such a magnificent manner. Thank you.